Hey, sorry. How's everything, man?
With yourself?
Yeah, same. Doing
Good.
okay at home. Been a long time at home, man.
Yeah, it's not very pretty at the moment, is it?
Yeah. What have you been up to?
Not much, mate. Just trying to keep productive.
Exercising?
Yeah,
Jogging around the place?
bit of walking.
Yeah, it's good.
Trying not to eat as much.
That's tough. I have the same problem. Luckily, I'm fasting.
Yeah. For you guys, it's a bit easier.
Yeah,
Is he adding everybody to the
sure,
meeting?
sure. Can.
Hey guys.
Morning. Hey,
Hi.
how you doing?
Yeah, good. How about you?
Not too bad. Fit, fat, and flourishing, mate.
Yeah.
Staying sane.
What's that?
Managing to stay sane in the lockdown period.
Just about. Yeah, just about. Yeah.
Oh dear. All right.
Hey, Solly.
Hey, Ronald. How are you, my man?
Yeah, looks like you're losing more and more hair, mate.
Mate, I'm losing more and more hair waiting for you to return calls.
Oh, yes. Oh, you're going to probably be losing a fair bit more.
Hello, everybody. Looks like we're all in. 10 of us here. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
All good. All good.
Hi,
So
Faizul.
hope you're all keeping well during these.
How's everything, Faizul?
Hey, what's that?
Hi,
Sorry.
Mohammed.
Good, good.
No, hi.
Hope you're all keeping well in these COVID times. Pretty excited to get this first one going for the VX user group. Something that we've been talking about for quite a long time amongst a few of us, and good to have it finally up and running. And hopefully we get to expand on that going forward. The main purpose of these things is pretty much just to make sure that we stay in touch, share ideas, share knowledge about how we're using the platform, about any research projects that are coming up. If there are any you might want on the VX side, and sort of raise them.
And you can't do your SOS anymore because it's closed already.
From there. So at the end of the day, what you get out of the platform is what you'll put in. So we encourage sharing as much as possible. So have a think about how you might, anything that you might want sort of covered. Between
Yeah, we already told you.
staff, you might be able to cover those off, or maybe somebody in the group is actually doing something that could cover those off. And we can then look at sharing them. The plan is to, going forward, actually have some physical sessions where we all catch up together. And once the COVID times are over, we can actually catch up once a month, maybe in Singapore, and actually have this. And then Jamie and Andrew and those guys can log in online.
Oh well.
So with that,
Okay.
just to get it started,
I have some questions for you guys. Maybe we can do the catch up first and just go.
at the
I got some questions.
VX
Okay, let me share screen.
platform and the VX training companion, showing you how that all goes together, and then looking at maybe that might raise
My screen goes.
just what we might have going forward.
Okay, this is the first
Amy?
question.
I think you're going to be
First question is, what is one new thing you want to try this holiday? What is one?
Hey, guys, how you doing?
What is one new thing you want?
Can we get everyone to put their microphones on mute except for Andrew and I and Solly, maybe? There we go. Happy days. I had someone look like they were going through a drive-through. Hey, Andy's going to run the cutter initially, just sharing some screens with you guys today. What we thought would be a good idea is just to go through and have a bit of a recap on the core platforms of VX Sport, also show some new stuff around VX Cloud that's just been released, enabling a lot more functionality for athletes who won't physically have units at the moment. I guess in my case, right now, we've sent out 20 plus units to one of the teams I'm working with, and those athletes are uploading their information remotely when it's all coming back to a central hub, which is working really well. So effectively, they've all got their own individual unit, own individual cable. They head out and they train. They come back in at night time. They dock it like any USB device, and the files are sucked up into Dropbox and pulled down into one destination, which is back into my VX view. And that's been working really well. The other thing that's been working well is the boys have been working hard on the wellness platform, allowing the coach to plan some RPEs, and then allowing athletes to put in more than one RPE per day, so multiple sessions. So we all know there's a pretty high correlation between RPE and our training load scores and our wellness. So now we think we've got a lot more flexibility on how that wellness platform works, and also ensuring that if you haven't got units for everyone, they can still be filling out their RPEs and their wellness every day. So I think, Andy, in a nutshell, mate, is that sort of what we want to cover off?
Yep, pretty much. Can everyone hear me all good?
Hello, mate. That's it.
Sweet. Good as gold. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll just start off with going through sort of VX View, the software, and then go into cloud and then training load afterwards. And Jamie, feel free to pop in or jump in any time and provide any sort of feedback on sort of using any of these platforms with teams, like in a team environment, and then anyone else just feel free to pop in with any questions as well. All good?
If you like, guys, just pop things in the chat too. Solly can moderate those for us and keep an eye on those. So if you have any questions specifically, just throw them amongst the chat there, lads, and we'll crack on.
Sweet. All right. Can you see this? Hopefully.
You can just see your Zoom screen at the moment, mate. Here we go.
VX there?
Yep. Happy days.
Good as gold. All right. So most of you guys are probably VX users, so I shouldn't have to go into too much depth in this, but basically VX View here is what we call like the main software. So you all would have seen that. Anything to do with your units, you'll be using this. So everything in terms of data or issuing units for profiles, anything all comes through VX here. So obviously this here, the serial number is a unit that I've got plugged in. So here's where you will do things like extract data, issue and arrays, anything like that. So I don't think I'll have to go into too much depth on that, as most of you should be using this already. But yeah, feel free to let us know if you haven't. So do we need to go through things like VX Live as well in terms of usability things there?
I think just maybe cover it off as a quick feature overview, rather than in-depth detail, and then we can move on. And if anybody's got any questions on that, then they can just fling them through in the chat.
Yeah. So actually, first of all, what would suggest making sure from the athletes tab, your team and all your athletes are set up correctly. So obviously you probably would have all done this before, but just going through it again, you can set up obviously the player positions, benchmarks, and everything like that from here.
Probably, Andy, just to reflect back on that benchmark screen just for one quick second, guys, because there's one thing that even some of our more regular users may not have been using yet, and that's the metabolic features, right? So the metabolic power is defaulted to 25.5 for high met and 33 for very high met. And that's based on sort of current research that's out there. And I know some of the more interval-based sports like hockey and rugby sevens are starting to get into that in a big way, and soccer has been there as well, football in the past. So partway through last year, we added a significant amount of new metabolic measures. And if Andy, just jump out of that, mate, into the benchmark screen for me, or the settings screen. Yep. You'll see there's a whole new tab down the bottom there for metabolic power bands, right? So there's the ability to set up zone thresholds at your own discretion, or you can set those absolute thresholds back in that main screen as well. And I think if you go back into the, if you go to training report for us, Andy. Sorry, settings. Yep. If you see in training report there, that metabolic tab there as well, there is a host of new metabolic measures. Now, at the moment, I'm not using it day to day. I am recording it. I am having it run in the background. I am sort of running my eyes over it. But right now, I'm in that sort of exploratory stage where I'm just trying to work out what the benefit might be to my athlete and my coach in terms of digesting the information back to them. So that's probably the big one that's been a change in that benchmarking screen, is the ability now to set those metabolic measures up.
Good as gold. We have actually added sprint zones as well, which a lot of you would probably be using speed zones, which is basically, if we go back to here, speed in zones. So obviously if it's set at 0 to 6.8 k's we've added sprint zones, which very, what's the word for it? Threshold that it has to be included in a sprint as well. So it can pick up extra distance because of our sprint definition that says athletes have to cover at least 10 k's per hour, and then get up to max speed, and then the sprint will finish at 75% of an athlete's top speed. So that's a bit different as well. So if you I'm sure there's no harm in adding one of those to your training report, like you said, Jamie, just to look through it and see if there's any benefits to your team or coach, whether or not you use it as a main metric or not yet. But yeah, nothing in harm in adding them anyway. Right. So once you've set up all your athletes, which you should have done, issue them out. So if we go to VX Live, this is actually a new screen that we're going to add in the next couple of weeks. But basically, you'll set up your screen as usual, which you would have seen with, obviously, your team, event, opposition, location, start the session, and you will see the tiles populate as usual. And I'm sure Solly, most of these guys, will they be using live stream as well? Solly?
There we go. So you're on now.
So, yep. I think most of the guys of FAS would be using it. Singapore Rugby would be using it. I'm not sure who else would be. I don't think anybody else would be.
Okay, I guess the couple of key tips on using VX Stream. The really important ones is trying to come up with a template where it's got import benchmarks there. It can be clunky if you session by session want to go in and start adding all your benchmarks for individual athletes. If you're going to apply a whole bunch of benchmarks for your live session to the whole team, easy. This is the screen to do it. Okay, it takes you all but no time. However, if you're going to break those benchmarks down into specific types of sessions, whether you're running a sprint session or a conditioning session or a match play, and you want to try and change the thresholds or benchmarks per athlete, then you are better off than to set up an Excel spreadsheet for each of those different types of sessions, where at that point in time, you press on import benchmarks, it'll suck that template in, and it's all of about a 15-second job. So if you are getting really competent with using the VX Stream, that's one thing you guys might like to try, is setting up your benchmark templates, and it saves a hell of a lot of time. In terms of a workflow, I would rarely now use the PC, the tile or the PC format of VX Live. I would say 95% of the time, pending I've got Wi-Fi or 5G, whatever, I would be using the streaming sessions now, carried in my pocket, much more effective and a lot more interactive now that you can start tagging live drills. And that's probably the second feature I wanted to mention, is in Stream now, you can tag live drills. So if you're running your warm-up, you can create a tag, start and stop it. You can see at that point in time what the warm-up entailed. If you then move into a 2-on-2 and a 20-meter square, you can name that drill, start a tag, finish a tag, and look at what's happened in that drill. So certainly the live streaming platforms evolved a hell of a lot, and they're probably the two key things. If you're looking for a bit more efficiencies in what you're doing, they would be the two things. By tagging your sessions live as well like that, the really cool thing is that when you suck that data back into VX, you can import the tags alongside your athlete data, and it saves you a hell of a lot of time. You're not going back into the files later on and chopping them up into the different parts, because those tags can be matched up with the athlete files. Not sure there's anything else, Andy, but they're probably the two big ones.
Yeah, exactly. And if anyone would like me to go through that individually another time, feel free to reach out. Happy to go through it and actually run through sort of on your computer as well. We can run a session with 1 or 2 units and just go through all those new features as well, show you exactly how to do it. Another thing I think maybe to add, Jamie, with this import benchmarks, you can have a whole bunch of different CSVs for different types of trainings. So you might have a game day performance, or benchmarks that you want specifically on a Tuesday training compared to a Thursday training. You can have 3 different CSVs.
Sorry, dude, that's what I was sort of meaning. 100%. Yeah. That's definitely the way to do it, lads. Like, set up a master spreadsheet where you might have all your session types, and you need to break them down into individual session types. A couple of ways people have done that. As Andy says, you can go by the session name or the session modality. Other guys are using game day +1, game day +2, and so on and so on. And look, either way works.
Yeah. So you can find that on the VX Sport Help Desk site. It'll be under VX Live Trims and Splits under VX Live. And there should, at the bottom here, be... Okay, that's not it. Oh, there. Import athletes benchmarks. So I'll just show you what it looks like quickly.
Awesome.
So basically, we recommend use this exact template. Just go ahead and fill in your own athletes' names and your own benchmarks. So it'll be like this. So your athlete name, and then if you don't want any benchmarks for that specific one, just leave it blank. Duration might be 50 minutes, and if you fill that in, save it as a CSV, and then when you go to import it in, just click import benchmarks and it's done.
Andy, just one thing for the guys, mate. When you're creating that spreadsheet, what's the best way to populate the names column? Because I know that it can be thrown out by not having exactly the right typing. So would you suggest exporting like a training file and then pasting that column in? How would you do that?
Yes. So the best format, or the only format that will work, is first name, comma, last name, no spaces. So probably the best way I would recommend is, if you have a training report, you can go show report and then export as a CSV, and then the only real way to do it, probably manually, go through and just swap over the first name and the last name.
Yeah, that's safest.
So anyway, that will take us to our next tab anyway. All of your analysis or export, you can view all your data and export it into external platforms like Excel or like a PDF, where you can pass those on to either coach or whoever you like. So here you'll have your dates. I will pick the 22nd, which was a game. From here, you've got a couple options. I'm sure all of you would know of trimming, splitting. Lots of options here, all of which can be viewed in your training reports and your CSV as well. If this will load. So here there was obviously one player who had a morning session. So it's best if you know that, to deselect them during your trims and splits and do all the same session at once, and then do the other one individually. Anyway, so here's the rest of your sessions. Obviously a first and a second half. Go through, save it. Or if you want to add an individual drill or something you want to look at specifically for one player, you can add a split, name that, and create it.
And that there, lads, is if you do that in real time, that process is somewhat redundant. You can always go back and change it later on, but that's effectively what we're saying. If you get your splits done in real time, that's where you're going to come back and be able to see those splits if you wanted to break it down or adjust them. Otherwise, they will appear in the training report by default.
Yeah, exactly. So basically here, show report. So this is probably the main report that most of you, I assume, would use for in and out everyday use. Here you can select any metrics you like, up to, I think we've got over 360 or 370 metrics at the moment. with all our zones, so plenty to choose from, and just tick on and off, and it'll add them to the table. I think there's a limit you can export to CSV, which is 50, but we've found most of the time that's pretty sufficient.
If for any reason you guys wanted to do more than the 50, there are a couple of other export functions you could try. If you want to go back one screen for me, Andy.
Yep.
So in the multi-export feature down there, you have got a host of other options there as well. And some of you, from a research perspective, would have already used these, where you can export the CSV of the raw inertial movement sensor data. Those that are syncing up to sports code have that opportunity as well to export high intensity instances. And that to me is one area personally we're working a lot on at the moment, is to try to understand how our tactical outcomes from any given training session or a game can be married up against our physical metrics as well. A very quick example would be from a S&C point of view, we're measuring high speed accelerations. And then we try and work out, well, how does high intensity accelerations have any impact on a tactical outcome? The examples would be, does it affect our tactical accuracy because we're running up too fast out of the line? Or does it affect our ability to break the offensive line? So just give us more line breaks. Those are the sort of relationships we're starting to look for now, and how the coach and the S&C works more closely. The other opportunities up there, you've got Kinetic, which is a hangover of the ProZone export, which is still functional today. You've got Coach Me Plus and Athlete Monitoring and OneTap, which are all third-party sort of wellness-based systems largely, and some load stuff there as well. And then you've got SmarterBase. SmarterBase is probably one of the most comprehensive exports. It's got all the column data that you could then suck up into a single database, and you can import column by column what you'd like to import. So it doesn't say you must suck up everything, but it gives you the opportunity to say which columns. The final one there is the metric event export, which is quite interesting. The metric event export is really useful when it comes to using things like Power BI. Right, so if you're trying to work out what does worst case scenario look like in a game, and you're concerned about what happened in a 5-minute block or a 2-minute block, you can design Power BI to suck the metric event export in, and then break your game down by position, by positional group, by durations or intervals, to try and look for patterns as to where those instances are happening. So that's been something again that we're spending a bit of time on. Where's the pathway from here for VX in terms of the export feature? Like, these are built, these will stay. However, I guess in the course of time, having that open API to move like an open door from one platform to another is something we're certainly investing some time with at the moment. So yeah, expect that as a future development. Anything else, Andy, in terms of the export or the training report?
Solly's just asked, he said, if anyone has got any questions now, feel free. While we're doing that, I'll load up actually a metric event export, like a demo we've got, and everyone can have a look at that. But has anyone got any questions?
Whilst Andy's just getting that queued up then, lads, look, in terms of my day-to-day workflow, and I think I'd speak for a lot of other S&Cs as well, like there's no way in the world every day I'll be going through and looking at my dashboard, my summary, my training report. It just doesn't happen. So look, your dashboard is really giving you an idea of how much petrol's in your car and how fast are you going. It's the most simplistic way of looking at things. The summary report is then that next level down. You find something here you think's an outlier. And if looking at that, you'd say in the total sprints is an obvious outlier there, the hooker. Click on that and it brings up every athlete. So your dashboard is really a means to identify an outlier. It's showing you your top 2, your middle 4, and your bottom 2. If then Andy clicks on sprints there, it would show us the total number of sprints versus the high intensity sprints. Now, this is where you can start to customize your reports a lot more. You can compare one metric versus another, and you're in charge of that. You pick the 2 metrics, you label your chart, and we start drilling down that way. And then the final part of VX View is a training report where you can pick a lot more metrics, a lot more depth. And look, that's not even what I look at day to day. It's often where I might reflect back after a couple of days and go, well, where was that training stimulus coming from? Because hand on heart right now, I live most of the time in the training companion tool, which we'll go to in a moment. But my workflow is pretty simple. I try and trim as much as I can whilst the sessions are going on in live. I download the data and try and get those trims lined up whilst I'm doing the download. And then I produce the training companion report, which we'll have a look at in a second. If there is a need to dig deeper, that's when I'll go back to my training report where I've got a larger array of metrics and try and find what I'm looking for. And then more recently, I've been working with the coach and the video analyst to use the sports code export to start syncing up that data we talked about before. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that you will have different workflows depending on who you report to, how many people are involved. But for me, it's pretty simple. Training companion, and where I need to, I'll look at the training report and or do the export out to my analyst or to Smarterbase.
Cool.
Right, Andy, where do we get to, mate?
So here is an example of what the metric event export will look like. So it'll have all your athletes in the column on the left. And every time, okay, this may just be one athlete. All good. So every time an event happens, it'll put in a start time and an end time. And that's seconds from start. So what we can do with the basic Excel calculation is figure out what minute that was in. So obviously 58 seconds is within the first minute. So we can use things like pivot tables to create things like this, where you can put out your whole game and all the sum of high intensity efforts. So in this case, sprints above 17 Ks an hour, speed above 17 Ks, accels and decels, or high intensity accels and decels. So, and then sort of group it in whatever sort of grouping you want. So say I want it to be in 1 minute per whatever sort of grouping is best for you. Say it's 5, you can look and say the first 10 minutes of the game were clearly the most high intensity periods of the game. So that's obviously then you can do things like Jamie said and pull this CSV export into Power BI and other things like that, which can create sort of smarter and just something extra as well. You can sort of figure out those worst case scenarios. You agree, Jamie? That's quite big in sports these days.
Yeah, massive. I just dropped out for a second, Andy, but I think you covered most, mate. One of the really cool insights that Andy was pointing to then is once you identify that worst case scenario, you know where it happened in a game, you can then go back and look at the video footage. So it's nice to know physiologically what was going on, but it's also really cool to understand, was there a technical or tactical advantage gained, or did we lose ground as a result of those periods of high intensity? So in a game of rugby, we might see there's lots of high intensity efforts, but it might be because we're under the pump. We're defending a lot, where we haven't got the ball and we're on the back foot. So that's one way of identifying worst case. The other reason it might be worst case is because the modality of the metric, has changed. So it might be there's lots of high intensity running, and that could be simply because we were chasing the ball. We weren't scoring points, we were chasing the ball. So there's lots of reasons why it happens. So I think the message here is find your worst case scenarios. It's no good in isolation necessarily with itself, but it's really, really powerful when you start drawing it out and comparing against other things.
Cool. Rightio. So we might head to Cloud now. So obviously in here, once you've done all your reporting and downloaded, if you click sync, that will push all your current data from VXView up to our cloud, which you can then view from any web browser on your phone, on any PC from anywhere around the world. You don't have to have VX installed. So here is an example of one specific day where a whole bunch of athletes have filled in their wellness and their RPE for a training day. So here you can see a whole bunch of questions that your coach has set up and they've asked, and it works on a traffic light system. So red is obviously the worst, yellow, orange is in the middle, and then green means good. So it all works out to be a score out of 100. So obviously the higher the better, and any athletes that come up as red lights, the coach can then really easily see, and then you can sort of reach out and ask any further questions and see what's going on with them.
So probably put a bracket around that as well, and that red doesn't actually mean bad. Okay, red is relative to the athlete. So I've got a couple of athletes currently who they would report often at sort of 45 to 55 points, and 60 is a great day for them. Likewise, I've got athletes who would notoriously report high, and they'd say that they're 85 or 95 all the time. But if they drop by 5 points and they're down at 80 or 75, to me, that's a red flag, because that's not their normal anymore. So one thing I think I still encourage is wellness is one that is relative, very relative to the athlete, and there's no set benchmark. Whereas if you look at game demands for someone playing a game of soccer or rugby, we know that they need to perform above 15 or 16 Ks an hour high intensity running to have an impact on the game. You can't say that about wellness. Okay, wellness is not definitive that green means good. What it does do is provide an awesome conversation starter. It also helps make the athlete more aware of how they're answering the questions. Is it a sleep quality issue? Is it a hydration issue? It allows us to look for correlations, which is really cool. So I think wellness is there's an argument in the future to start looking at things like standard deviation. How much are they moving away from their normal? All right. So I think encourage you again that don't look at things as one number is going to solve all the problems, but look at its relationship to other things. In this case, the ability to compare against RPE. One of the changes here has also been is each athlete now can look at their last 7-day trend. And like anything, whether it's load or wellness, what we're trying to avoid is those spikes. Nothing that's up here and nothing down in the troughs either. So that gives you a pretty good relative understanding as to whether the athlete has changed dramatically. So yep, look at the traffic light. Is it a green? Is it a red? That gives you a cue. Is it their normal? And then go back and have a look at quickly what that track looks like. And that should stimulate the right questions.
Cool. So here, this was up until about 1 or 2 weeks ago. This was all we've had. Just recently, we've added a new feature called Session RPE, which is an add-on to just your standard RPE. So it means you can now fill in multiple sessions per day, and athletes, if they can fill in their own sessions as well. So I would say the majority of the time, the coach will fill in a session. They'll say, today, cool, it was off-peak conditioning, and that was the session. So then after they've done that, each athlete can come through, fill in their RPE and wellness for that session. However, if they then they go for a run in the afternoon or something like that, or during the off season, if they do any sort of conditioning exercise, they can come in, create their own session, and their coach can see what they've been doing without the rest of the team. So that's something we've added in, specifically trying to be for the off season, as quite often the coaches have no sort of tracking of what their athletes are doing outside of when they're with the team. So you can see here, this is just an overall session average for the day. You can see the average coach RPE compared to the average athlete RPE, and then you can go down and look at each individual athlete and all their sessions, what they rated, their RPE and their durations, and the target compared to what they actually scored. So that is a new feature in the RPE dashboard here. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add on that, Jamie. It's pretty straightforward.
Look, it's a great education tool as well. I think if you were trying to talk about exercise and prescription and load, it does gives the athlete more of an understanding of what we're looking for in terms of intensity. So it could be that your athlete trains for longer than they should, but at too lower intensity. These are the sort of the tools that we can use now to identify where the problem is. Is it a duration issue or is it an intensity issue? And particularly when you've got no hardware, in some cases, this is got a high correlation to when we start moving into the next screen shortly around the chronic and acute training parameters. Andy, the other thing, mate, I don't think there's been too many changes in the team summary, but that's also a feature that sits within the cloud.
Yeah, for sure. So here is, you can see GPS data for your athletes. So you can select your team, and for whatever date it is, you can view 2 metrics at a time. So distance and high intensity distance on the small graph here.
There's also table data on the bottom right hand side.
At the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can come through and change any of these. What's a good one? So if you want to look duration compared to something else, you can go through and do that for each specific day as well, without having to have VXView installed at all.
So each athlete can go in and obviously view their own RPE data. They can view their own wellness data. They can view their training data when they've got GPS files. They can change which 2 metrics they look at. I don't necessarily encourage that, but we try and pick out a couple of variables. In this case, it's duration and high intensity distance or high intensity speed distance. It might be that you just get them focusing on total distance versus high intensity speed. And that might just be where you ask them to live for the time being, which is fine. What you also see is not everyone else's data for each athlete, but they see the lowest and the highest within inside their positional group, I believe, isn't it? There, Andy, or not? Or is it team?
I think it's team.
Scroll one for me, bud.
So this would be team average, I believe.
Is there a filter though on the top of this for coaches or not? I can't remember. Yeah, there.
Oh,
yeah,
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can look at athlete and no, it might just be athlete.
Per athlete. All right, you can break it down per athlete. You can also look via trims if there was trims available, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So for the athletes, as long as they're doing the same type of training, they see the lowest, they see them, they see the highest.
Cool. Any questions there? What's the shout out now before we move to training load tool or
Probably
training
probably just quickly show them the data entry screen.
Right. So we've just added this in as well, this new button, which just makes it easier to fill in wellness data for your athletes. So it'll click there, select your team, and it should have if a coach had set up a session for you, there'd be a session here. There'll be either wellness and RPE for both of those, and they can fill it in from there. As soon as they've done that, it'll upload to the coach, and the coach can see it, as well as the athlete can view their own data as well. Cool. Okay.
Happy days.
So this is the training companion or the training load tool previously. Best way to start. So here this is Jamie, what is this? 2017 World Cup campaign of Black Ferns.
That's the one. Yep.
Yeah. So I've set up so in Training Companion, you can set up a season or a sort of campaign. So I set it up from the very start of the trainings to the very end of, I assume, was the final. So that was just over 3.5 months.
Yeah. So what you're looking at there, guys, is effectively at the start of that campaign, there was a get together, there was a camp. Then we had a reasonably long sort of week assembly and some games. We had had another weekend together prior to heading over to the World Cup. Now that's what happened in that short space of time. So what I'm going to get Andy to do, just to make this a little bit clearer for everyone, is just drill down now to the start of August. Andy, if you can, please, mate, just that last month.
So that looks a bit better. We can go days.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. Great. All right. So what we're looking at there now, as you can see, the metrics that we were recording are now represented in those columns. That's a team average. And a lot of the time for coaches, that's enough of a snapshot to realise what our normal might normally be like. And then also running across there, you've got those black outlines, which is your RPE, and you've got the purple line there being wellness. So you can see the purple line is influenced not just by playing games where you see a steep drop the day after games, but it can also be impacted by long haul travel. So at the start of that campaign, right at the start of August there, we were in camp for 4 days, I think it was, rather than 3, which we can't see the first day. But you'll see after long haul travel, big drop off in wellness numbers, and we slowly climb back up to the point where we're sort of above where our normal might normally be. And then after every game, you peak up on your games, and there is a psychological and physiological effect on game days where you often see that wellness numbers will spike slightly, and then you'll see you drop off again, game day +1, till you slowly build up again. And in this campaign, it was games every 4 days. Right, so on a 4-day cycle, with the exception of, I think, the semi and final, there was 4 days between, then it was 5 and 5. So it's a pretty consistent pattern and something that's quite easy to prescribe to. But as we work through this platform in a moment, you'll see a couple of really cool innovations in this platform. Is you don't need to base your training stress balance simply on the normal week, not the 7 days and 28-day months. But in this case, since we're playing games every 4 to 5 days, we started using our chronic and acute over those 4 and 5 days as well, rather than using it over the 7. And it does make a significant difference. So that there is a bit of a snapshot. If you scroll down, Andy, for me, to your scattergram.
So my
Oops, say again, mate.
my microphone is playing out. Can you hear me there?
It's not bad.
Hang on.
Hear me now?
Yep, happy days.
Good as gold. Okay.
Good. Just down to the scattergram, mate.
Yeah, good as gold. Oh no. So if we click on the day.
Yeah, cool. Cool. So Andy's picked on a day there, the 26th, which was actually the day of the final. That gives you your team average. All right. So when we go back into the individual day session, you'll see that some athletes were achieving over 100 points, and some who were coming off the bench might have only got 30 points, as an example. Down the bottom there, you've got your training stress scattergram. And when you do have profile pictures for your athletes, their little faces will pop up there, which makes it look pretty cool. What you can also do is you can change the width of the bands. And some of you may follow Tim Gabbett's research, and likewise, what I have done, and not in this case here, is that I've actually changed my orange bands to be a little bit fatter based on my athlete population. The green band stays about the same as to what Tim Gabbett has suggested being like in an optimal zone, and the red band's therefore a little bit thinner. So I use the orange as a bit of a cue. Are we getting enough of the right training stimulus? Are we spiking the athlete's load too much or too little? These are a nice visual for the coach. My coach specifically really likes when all the girls are sitting in that green zone there prior to games. He gets a bit of a feel-good factor about that. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are not going to have injuries by any stretch, but it should, hopefully, by avoiding those spikes and troughs, have a smaller risk associated to it. So this cover page here is largely based around the team. Anything else to add there, Eddie, before we go to the next page?
That's pretty much spot on. So I would have said, yeah. So if you want to look at a team overview, definitely look at the dashboard. You can zoom out as a whole, look at a whole year if you like, weeks and months, or you could get a good sort of view at how you're tracking, especially this sort of visual here. So if we go to a single day, it's sort of where you can break it down a little bit, sort of by athlete. So here's the same visual as you saw before, just with sort of session averages, what they are compared to your benchmark and the top performer for each. Then, carry on.
Yeah, sorry, mate. With that, I guess the table that we haven't probably explained is you have got the ability to pick what metrics make up that training score, and that's critical. So in other platforms you may have seen, you were dictated to and told that your training load, your body load, your activity score, whatever you want to call it, is made up of a formula that might not be specific to your sport. What we've done here is you can pick by pressing the change metrics button that Andy will flick across to. You can pick which of those workload metrics make up your training calculations. So once you've picked out which ones you want, you go back and you now can see you can weight those metrics, one being, yeah, I'm interested, but it's sort of the least important, up to 5 being it's a really high priority item. You can write in a benchmark as to what is normal, or what are you expecting to see, and those benchmarks there are loosely based on what gold standard might look like for a game, as an example. What we were finding is that on the old workload calculations is they tended to show a high bias to people that were either playing for long periods of time or running long distances. And in some of the sports, those two things don't determine performance outcomes. They are more likely to be things like high intensity efforts, whether that's accelerations, decelerations, sprinting, impacts, jumps. All those things tend to have a higher correlation to both stress on the body and performance outcomes. So forming your picture by using those metrics and weighting those metrics early on, if we go back to the individual chat now, the single day, yep, awesome. If we scroll down there, we can see for each athlete, they get a column chart, and you can see how they've been stressed. If you go down to the table now, we can see that everyone on that day, that was the finals day, they put in their wellness. I'll excuse them of the fact that some of them didn't complete their RPE that day. That was the day of the final. So as you see, that some athletes have scored really high, well over 100 points. Others have scored little or no points, down around sort of the 30s and 40s, and that's because they didn't play a full game. They come on for the last sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes. What was really encouraging when we implemented the changes in 2017 is that initially I was seeing a lot of my backs, were always registering at the top of the workload scores. And it was an unfair bias as to how the load was being represented. So this is not an exact representation of the final. From memory, I think it was Sarah Goss and Kendra were both sort of around that sort of 110 points. But what was really encouraging, I was getting a forward, a back, alternating all the way down those workload scores, which was telling us we're on the right page. It was telling us that the way we're measuring load is giving everyone an equal opportunity to fairly represent themselves on that table. So I think it's been a fundamental shift in the way we've sort of thought about load, but something that started to work really well for us.
Yeah, cool. I think you'd probably agree as well. This sort of table here from the single day is probably a really good coach's report.
Awesome.
Rather than giving them a report, just a straight CSV from Excel, there's just going to be a full data, no pictures, no nothing. This here, you can just print this as a PDF basically and forward that, and it'll be exactly this page. If you've got the athlete picture here, it'll have that. You can have the athlete or your team logo at the top as well. It just looks really good and it's quite professional.
Yeah, bang on, mate. I think that's really, really good. And I think also where your mouse is at the moment just reminded me that you can type in some notes for the coach there. So it might just be a couple of really simple observations. The best thing about it is I can get back to the hotel, chuck my units in the case, have a shower, come out, and because I've got my splits already done live, this report, when I get out of the shower, has already been produced. The files have all been downloaded. This has been generated without me having to do anything further. So in terms of a workflow, it's really fast and efficient. Then me running my eyes over it, typing in a couple of notes, I can walk into the coaching meeting with confidence of showing in the team page. Like I can go back to the home page initially and say, hey, look, this is where we're sitting as a team. This is sort of what I'm thinking for tomorrow. Here is the one pager on each of the athletes. Job done. And that's pretty much as simple as my workflow is on our evening debriefs. I know that there's always less than an hour pretty much from getting off the pitch to having that debrief. So to me, to have a workflow that's between 15 and 20 minutes is crucial to using your time effectively.
Cool. And a new feature, along with that, entering some information as well. You can also code it as either like a light, medium, or heavy training or a game. So what I'll show you next really affects, that game is really important as well. So if I save that, so we've just added this new tab, athletes. So this is where you can look even more into individual players' scores and how they're broken down. So I'll pick a random athlete. And here's where you can compare the games versus, this athlete might not be very good.
Yeah, pick Gossie. Yeah.
Yeah. So here you can compare trainings versus games and their averages. So here's a whole lot of visuals. Their training load score, game -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, and how they tracked during the week up until the game. And I'm sure there's a whole, whatever you prefer in terms of visuals, there's a whole lot of different variation there. And this is probably this, I'm sure in a week there's not enough time to look at specific things for every single athlete, but say there was one athlete in particular that's really stood out in your training report. Here's a good thing to look into and say, what was the reasoning for her or his training load score on this specific day? What happened during the week?
Yeah, no, cool, Andy. I think, yeah, bang on. So it's about producing insights rather than just collecting information. So in this instance, here's a really cool one. So if you look at that training stress balance over the course of the last 14 days, yes, there's been some fluctuations, but the granularity of that data is really high. So her fluctuations, if you extended that out to look at the graph in its true form, that line would be all but straight. Okay, the fact there's been small variations, she still end up in that small green banner or band, sorry, that would say that she hasn't had a huge amount of fluctuation in her load, which is what we're after. The training load score over the last 28 days, again, I'd be saying that try and think about the length of your campaigns, whether you're going to prescribe over a 4 or a 6 or an 8 week campaign. And then, yes, training load over the last 28 days of the month is interesting, but I tend to reflect on the length of a campaign, whether it's 20 days or 30 days at a time. And to do that, Andy, unless there's something down the bottom there, mate, you want to show them?
It's just more sort of visuals, really, and more graphs. Sort of, you can compare an athlete compared to their last session, the athlete average, and then the group average, etc. So, a whole bunch of things that might be interesting for you for specific athletes. If it came to it, sort of thing. So I wouldn't no one would recommend looking into spending hours and hours and hours scouring over this sort of data, but it's there in case anything pops up and you want to look at specifically.
Those leaderboards are quite cool though too, Andy, down the bottom there, mate. So if you were sort of trying to, I guess, induce a bit of a competition amongst your athletes. So the idea of who was the top performer in those different modalities, that's an easy thing to do these days. And it might be that you chuck those sort of things up on the training wall or on their WhatsApp group chats or whatever you might use. So yeah, it's handy. It's handy just to create competition.
Cool.
So,
so here's the last.
Before you move on, there's a question from Ronald in the chat. If you want to have a look at that quickly on the training loads.
Yeah.
What do you got there, Sol? Read it out, mate.
So he says, quick question here, forgive my ignorance and please correct me if I'm wrong or if I've missed out something. I'm seeing a lot of information from a singular individual training session. I can see that the training companion helps me see the various days or months, but in the training load report or any other form of report for that matter, would it be possible to see an accumulative report of all the loads in total over, say, the last 1 month or last few days?
Yep. So you're probably your clearest opportunity to do that. You can still produce a range, and we'll use training report to start with. So back in VXView. So in VXView, you can pick based on those red circles being where there were sessions. So Andy could pick from the 3rd of 2016 all the way through to whenever. Okay, so you can pick a range of days that way and look at accumulated load. You can look at that by athlete, by team. You can look at it. What other filter options were there, Andy? I'm just trying to remember.
So if we load this, hopefully it doesn't take too long. But you can filter by positional group, single athlete,
trims,
different trims and splits. So if you sort of every single week, if you do the same drill on a certain day, you can trim them, call them the same thing, and select only first, say it's called first half or training drill or something, and select just that one. And only that drill will pop up, and you can then sort of filter it by date and by athlete as well, and look at how they're tracking over the whole month, and how do those sessions compare from one to the other.
Another thing you can do there, if you just get rid of your trim there for a sec, Andy, for me, mate. If you go back to show totals.
Yep.
So on show totals there, you can filter that by team or by an athlete as well. And if you went total all days, it gives you an understanding now for each individual athlete over the course of all those sessions, their total training duration or total distance covered, and so on and so on. If we pop back into the training companion, by design on the home screen, you can look at accumulated load over the period of a week, a month, or a specific day.
Through here.
Through there. So we start looking down there, and Andy can just use the days, the weeks, or the month filter to start getting an idea of load over 1 month or over 1 week or 4 weeks or days.
Yeah.
The next screen over is where we start to look at individual training days. And I guess the function of that report, when you look at individual training days on the next screen, mate.
Training stress.
Single day.
All right.
Yeah. The single day report is exactly that. It's basically to produce those one-page insights to take into those coaches' meetings, or to produce for the athletes to send out. So you have got both functions. You can look at accumulated load, and not to forget also, when you refer back to the home screen, or go with the next one down, the training stress one, Andy, for me too. Yep. Or this training stress screen here. If Andy scrolls down there, you now have the ability over a period of time to start looking at accumulated load for training stress, not a single day. So we'll give you a single day score, but it'll also give you a score what's happened over the period of that campaign. And if Andy clicks on chronic and acute,
where's that?
Just go down a bit, mate, underneath that graph.
Oh,
yep. We can start looking for where those fluctuations may be occurring in your chronic and acute load scores as well, which is pretty handy. And that's again over a period of time rather than a single day. And just want to scroll to the bottom of that one, mate. I think it's this chart that I was going to think about. Yeah, there it is. All right, so what we're seeing there now is the day-by-day TSB and load scores for the athlete there as well, based on a 28-day cycle or a 7 for the acute. If we wanted to change that, Andy could go to the settings, go to advanced, show advanced, and then down there, you can determine now what your traffic light system looks like, be that for wellness or RPE, or by default, we do use the Gabbett mentality, but for where I've changed mine is down next to the chronic and acute. I've got 4 in the acute based on that campaign, and I think we were using a 20-day turnaround, so five games. Now, that'll change again for me this year because we're not using 4-day turnarounds. We're back on 7s, so I'll change that. But what you can also do, depending on the training age of your athlete, the chronological age of your athlete, time of competition, you may like to change your bands for your training stress. So you may like to make both those orange ones the same or slightly different, make them fatter, make them skinnier, completely up to you. A lot of the training stress methodology you'll see doesn't have 5 bands. Often it just has a green band above and below. Now, for the purpose of the software and creating a cool visual, we decided to have a traffic light system to be just outside of optimal, and then more at risk, either too low or too high. So it's a slightly different mentality to what you might normally see, but something I think works.
Cool. So that basically sums up the training companion and what it can do, as well as VXView and VX Cloud. So I don't know if anyone else asked any questions, or if we want to go through anything in more depth.
there's a few chat questions there, Sully. I can't read at my end, mate, at the moment. Can you anything there of interest?
Anyway, so the last one was just Ronald's question, a couple of messages from Anthony and a few guys along the way. So nothing at this stage that sort of relates to the platform. There's one new one that's just come in now. Okay, that's Ronald just saying cheers, thanks. So yeah, any other questions from anybody else? Or is everybody happy?
Do we want to think about what other sort of topics we want to go through sort of next time, Sully?
Yeah, so I'll put that back to the group again. So guys, obviously you're the guys that are using it. Is there anybody that has any specific questions relating to your methodology or workflow, anything that you're having any issues with now that you'd like a bit more clarity with, so that we can schedule that into the next session? If you want to, you can turn your microphone on, or you can just stick it in the chat.
I see Dan McCloy commented, Andy, that the position filter was in the column header. So was that regarding cloud, maybe?
That's cloud, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Dan's just put another one in there saying that the VX Training Companion does not require a database to run. It works.
Yeah, great call. Great call. Yeah, so where that's really handy, team, is if you find that the Training Companion is the best way to visualize the information for your coaches, and I think it is, I think it's a really quick, efficient tool, then they could actually install the application on their computer and draw down from the cloud database, which is just summary data. There's less moving parts, less things to go wrong, less chance of the coaches manipulating data you don't want them to, and the master stays on your PC. So you still trim it, you still split it, but in terms of visualizing it and for them to be able to filter things quickly and get the snapshot, they could simply have that installed on their PC and draw down from your database, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so if I reload this, there's two options when you first open it. You can either load it from your own database, which will pull from your VXView data. So the coach will do that, but okay, this isn't going to work. It's going to log me in automatically. So basically, there'll be two options. Load it from your VXView database, which if you have VXView on your computer, you can do that. The only thing it won't have is the RPE and wellness, which is obviously pulled from cloud. So if that's not important to you and you want to load it really quickly, you can go load it with your database. Otherwise, yourself or any of your coaches can log in from their computer without having to have VX installed. Log into VX Cloud and it'll pull through all the most up-to-date data, and you'll be able to see exactly the same stuff as well. I'd probably, one thing I'd recommend, making sure you do discuss with your coach in terms of benchmarks. You don't want to have two separate lots of benchmarks and looking at different things. You probably want to keep that as like specific as you can for your individual team and your needs.
Yeah, no, that's key for sure. Yeah, they can have a very large influence on your results if you use a slightly different benchmark, so definitely worth doing. I think Faisal may have just popped the question there, Sol.
Yep. Faisal's asking, how does VX derive the numbers for the total training load?
Cool. So look, there's two training load or two load variations. So if Andy was to open VXView again just quickly, if you go into your settings and to overall stats.
Here, oh, sorry. Yep.
Oh, same. There's one there called Athlete Load. There's another one called Athlete 2 Load and Athlete 3D Load. So all those load metrics there are not customizable. Okay, so effectively your Athlete Load score was originally come up with by us. It was a similar to a body load score you may have seen in some other applications where we decided based on US college soccer what by multiplying distances and durations. I think it was high speed running, Andy, from memory.
I'm not exactly. Dan would know, I believe.
Do you remember, Dan, the other metric?
Yeah, it's total distance, high intensity distance, total sprints and high intensity sprints, I believe.
Cool, mate. And effectively what we did is we created a load score based around those metrics that was designed pretty much for soccer. Okay, so since then we've evolved a lot. You've now got the ability to look at a 2D and a 3D. And quite simply, it's inertial movement sensor data. Anything on those ones, Andy?
Yeah, so basically it's x, what is it, x squared plus y squared plus z squared of the accelerometer data. So
Yeah.
you can use them indoors and outdoors. These are old files, so that's obviously zero, but we expect there's some more information on our help desk as well on them, but we would sort of expect a full game would be between a score of between 300 and 500, and that you can track those all the time, and they sort of relate to pretty close to distance we've found as well. But they'll also take into account sprints, impacts, and high intensity efforts and things like that as well.
And the other one that we use now in the training companion, if you flick back to that one, which may be where Faisal was heading with his question.
The main training load score, that was.
Yep, cool. So that number there, Faisal, mate, that's a derivative of the metrics you pick, how you weight them, okay, and what percentage of the benchmark they achieved. It's an accumulated number based on how close they got to that benchmark and how you've weighted each of those, right? And that's what that number there tells you, okay? So it's a customizable load score. And you could have that consistent across all of your business, all of your teams, or it could be something very specific to your team. It is flexible. You can keep playing around with it until you start getting the numbers that you want, okay? That you start thinking that, look, I know these three players over here are gold standard, and I can see they're always 100, 105 points, 110 points. Effectively 105 would be they've achieved 105% of the benchmarks. Okay, if they were getting a score of 50, they've achieved effectively 50% of the benchmarks, and then taking into consideration the weighting. Okay, whether you've weighted them, some are less important than others. Is Faisal answer your question? I can't see Faisal's face, so I'm going to have to rely on.
We haven't had any more from him. We've got another one. Faisal says, yep.
Yep. Yeah.
A question
Cool.
from Ronald about indoor sports. So Ronald used to be the strength and conditioning coach of hockey, and is now more sort of working with netball and floorball. So he's asked, what about the use of VX with indoor sports? What's the validity and what's the validity for usage indoors, considering it's a whole different ballgame when it comes to the tech?
Yeah, cool. So look, I'll refer back to a study that Martin Boucher did. I want to say 2012, 2013. I'm pretty sure it's on our website still. He looked at validating, I guess, the use of the accelerometers in looking at ankle stiffness. Now, the reason that's important to mention is because he found there was a high correlation in the sensitivity of the accelerometers to give him pattern recognition of different types of ankle stiffness. Great. The second thing to mention is more recently, Solly, the lads were doing some work on badminton, correct?
Yes.
What was it? I just recap that study if you remember. I think it was they were looking at the was it only accelerometry they were looking at?
I think so, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to go back and read it again, but it was done by Matt Wild at NYSI.
Yeah. And I think in a nutshell, they found there was a high correlation of what they expected to see.
Yeah. The report and VX was probably the most accurate out of the lot from what I can see.
I think, RJ, though, to answer your question, mate, there is going to be some variation between your indoor and outdoor metrics. Okay, so back in the day, we assumed that pedometers were accurate. We know they're not. Accelerometry is still based on a similar mentality, though, of using inertial movement sensors to determine distance, whether that's on step rates, stride lengths, and so on. The reason VX has got a good correlation back to outdoor data is because it's calibrated on an athlete profile. So when you get your units, they've all got a profile that comes with it. However, after you use your units outdoor for periods of time, they'll self-calibrate to each athlete. It's not stored on the unit, it's stored in the athlete profile. So when you change units from athlete to athlete, it doesn't matter. It takes that profile with them. But by doing that, it understands that step pattern, so to speak, will be most like that amount of distance, right? So it calibrates over time. If you are not in a position to train outdoors often, there is a calibration test you can also do. And it's effectively running around a track of 120 meter intervals from memory, Andy.
Your 100, yeah. Well, it's four times 100 basically.
Yeah, so you're walking, you're jogging, you're running, you're sprinting.
Yep.
So you go around the track and you perform those increments, and then you do that 3 times. And after those 3 times, we expect the unit to have calibrated based on that information to know when you're walking, you're running, you're sprinting, and you're jogging. Sorry. So look, they can be used indoors. Can we always keep improving 100%? But the correlation is still pretty good. I would anticipate it somewhere around that sort of 5 to 10% mark, the differences between scores. Would you see anything different, Andy?
No, so that's basically pretty much spot on. We would say anything up to 10% of the GPS counterpart for all of our provider metrics,
Cool.
which is limited as expected.
Just on that one, as
Yeah.
the athlete develops, let's say, you've got a guy that starts in under 15s and then slowly starts growing and moves through to under 18s or whatever. At what stage do you do that calibration for?
Yeah, no, good call. Well, I think obviously if you look at some of the stuff done by John Oliver around peak height velocity, it's probably a good indication as to how often you might like to recalibrate your units. And look at those peak height velocity curves that exist in male and female athletes. It's between the ages of sort of 12 up to 21. We're going to see those growth spurts. You'd imagine post 21, whilst there is growth, you're probably not going to see the same changes in limb length. Okay, so if you're looking for a guide as to how often you want to recalibrate your units with young athletes, refer to that. If you've got a demographic of athletes that are sort of 21 and above, you'd imagine the only thing that's going to change a lot of how they run would be strength and technique. All right, so if they get stronger, you may experience, or more flexible, you may see that their stride length increases slightly or their stride frequency increases. Likewise, if there's a fundamental technique change, you may see some changes in that as well. But to be fair, as we know, we're not training track athletes, the majority of us. We're training sports people. So the likelihood around changing technique to run faster is probably less than it would be a track athlete. Myself, I would recalibrate my units probably at the start of a season with my group, and I wouldn't need to do it again for the period of a season. For what it's worth, it's not going to change things dramatically. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is, I don't know, Andy, the answer to the question: does your unit recalibrate, or can you clear the calibration to start again? I don't know what the answer is to that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that actually. We'll have to look into, yeah.
Yeah, maybe something it's worth us asking the question. What I can tell you is that probably twice a year I use the step reports to get a step profile for my athletes as well when they're uninjured. Right, so at the start of a season and probably halfway through the year, I get them running sort of 3 40-meter sprints. And on the back of that, I have a step profile for them of what their accelerometers are telling me. So what their horizontal forces are, their vertical forces, side to side, what does that look like? Now, why that becomes handy is that if the athlete is returning to play or is injured, I can bring up that force profile from the athlete and see how close to their normal they are, because they might run ugly but produce a lot of force. They might run like a gazelle. They look pretty, but there's no force there. There's no power there. We're also looking for the differences that might occur in step rates or propulsion off the ground, those types of things that could determine whether or not they're more or less ready to get back into full training. So that's another little thing you might want to have a look at. But yeah, I've never really thought of the calibration thing about redoing it, so it's probably something we can come back to you on. But as I say, most of the athletes I look after are more than 21 years of age, and you wouldn't expect a lot of changes after that.
Ronald, does that answer your question?
Yeah, one other thing from me, Andrew, if you flip back to the training companion, I think this kind of goes to show the flexibility of the system. I know you guys were talking about remote training when I jumped on. I was about 5 minutes late, but this data that we're looking at here, Jamie, this is all collected from athletes that are training remotely, right? And then Andrew's got this up on his computer, and he doesn't have your database. So it shows that flexibility across their training remotely, getting the files to you, you're uploading it to cloud, and then he's getting all of this data straight from VxCloud, and he's able to have a look at it and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't have to do anything on his end. He just opens the training companion, and it'll log in, pull all this data down from him, and he can have a look at that stuff. So I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, it is, mate. That's exactly right. So the group of athletes Andy's got up on the screen here now is just 21 out of our 35 contracted women's rugby players here in New Zealand is what he's showing you right now. Obviously, with 21 athletes training remotely, there's going to be a lot of variation in content. So I wouldn't expect all their training load scores to be exact. And we do match this up against their weekly schedules. And we do look for, did they achieve the right intensity of the exercise that I prescribed? And as Dan said, it does give you that flexibility for another S&C who's based more locally with them to also get the benefits of looking at their particular athletes, or me as the central or the lead provider, looking at it all collectively together, who's submitting files, what types of sessions they were doing, and so on. So, yeah, it's a really cool tool. And at the moment, I think it's free, Dan, for other coaches to be added, right?
Yeah, you can have as many coaches as you want on VxCloud, assign them to the teams that you have. So yeah, add as many as you want, and they can all download the training companion or sign into VxCloud with their own accounts and have access to the teams that the administrator gives them.
So in short, it makes you look good. It does all your graphs. It makes it really cool visuals. And the coach can log on there at any time. Just keep your data up to date, and you can trim it and split it and play around with it however you like. Yeah, it's a really neat platform.
I might just jump in. If anyone hasn't installed it already, the website to download it from is trainingload.net. So that should take you to a page where you can just download the application for free, install it, and then just log straight into your cloud details, and it'll pull all your own data, and you're good to go. Yeah. So from here, download and install, and then just follow these steps. Download 1, 2 little programs here, and then download the main installer. Easy. Cool. Was anything else, Solly?
No, the questions have popped up from there. I'm assuming everybody else is happy. Yes, no, maybe. One from Desmond that's come in. Des is with SSI, and he's been looking after the canoeing, kayaking guys. He says, can I clarify the step profile collated over time is more used for the indoor-outdoor correlation of data, whereas if you constantly trained outdoors, the data comes off the satellite tracking?
Yeah, essentially. So when you can have your unit set to indoors and still train outside. You could do that. You'd have it in an indoor mode. However, the range of metrics you get once you put it in indoor mode is going to be less, okay? Because when you're outdoors, you're relying on GPS and all your inertial movement sensors, and obviously your heart rate. The moment you go indoors, then the range of metrics you get solely need to rely on the inertial movement sensors. So we're talking accelerometers, magnetometers, gyroscopes, and to a point heart rate. Why I would use the step, the accelerometers outside is for that injury profiling or that risk analysis you might like, or return to play protocols. That's why I would use the inertial movement sensors outside. Second to that is obviously they're responsible as well for your impacts and collisions. So it's important that it's not that they're turned off at any stage. All the sensors are always running, but they do have slightly different functions whether you're indoors or outdoors.
Cool. All good with that, Des? Iqbal, anything from your side? Nothing?
Oh, he just did a thumbs up. I think he thinks he's all good.
Really? Oh, hasn't come up on my side. Okay, cool. So guys, I think obviously if that's it, if nobody's got any more questions, maybe we could have a look at some of the topics that you might want covered. Have a think about that and post that in the WhatsApp group. Again, as I said, you'll only get out of this what you put in. So we want to make it, tailor it as much as possible to what you guys are doing and where you're having problems or where you're finding the platform really beneficial. So make sure you populate some questions in there or some topics that you might want us to cover going forward. Andy, Jamie, thank you much for the time today.
Good scope.
I think it was pretty good, giving us all a bit more clarity around the different platforms. And yeah, if there's nothing else, guys, have a great day forward and look forward to the next one.
Sounds good, lads.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks, Sol. Thanks. Cheers, guys.